Alright, hello and welcome back to Heroes of Might and Magic 3. We're going to be talking about what we know so far about the Bulwark faction, which is the third town due to be added to the Horn of the Abyss mod for Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Following on from the previous two completed Horn of the Abyss towns, the Cove town and the Factory town. So Bulwark is a snow-based town featuring Norse and other influences. We're going to start by taking a look through the teaser trailer and talking about what's on there. And then we're going to go on to some of the kind of behind the scenes stuff that you might not have seen if you've only seen this trailer. Let's give it a quick watch. So it starts off all being based on the factory, so there's nothing new to see here. If you're already familiar with the mod, it's more or less as expected. Then he jumps through this portal and we start to see the first signs of change. So he goes for, and this is something that was added in the previous patch, he goes for the learning skill and then he chooses to take Eagle Eye afterwards, which has been buffed. Personally, still probably not picking Eagle Eye in that situation, but nice try. This is one of the new additions. This is, I believe, the Jotun, the Ice Giant. This is the planned tier 7 creature for the Bulwark town. And then to the west, we've got Mountain Spirits, which I believe are the upgraded tier 4 units. So yeah, we can see right there it says a pack of Mountain Spirits as he hovers the cursor over them. And then he continues to go to the west, where we see lots of Kobold Foremen. So these are the upgraded tier 1 units. The basic tier 1 units are Kobolds. That is presumably, I think, their dwelling. It does have a flag attached to it. So clearly a new map object. All of these visuals, by the way, are not yet finalized, worth mentioning that. He goes to the Redwood Observatory, which does reveal much more of the map, so we can see we've got Odana, the Chieftain, that is presumably the Might hero of the Bulwark town. To the south, we can see Yetis, which are unupgraded Mountain Spirits, the basic tier 4 units. That appears to be, I imagine, their dwelling. Does seem to fit in with the theme of the Mountain Spirits. To the west, we have the town itself, the Bulwark town. And it's got a kind of star fort shaped design. Nothing else we can immediately see in this particular screen, but as we hover over Odana, we can see a few stacks of kobolds and a couple of stacks there of possibly upgraded kobolds. I'm not really sure exactly what those are. Scrolling to the south, he goes to Eichton, the Chieftain. Similar thing here, we can see Mammoths here. That is the tier 6 unit. They are said to be the tankiest unit of pretty much in the game, in fact. Tankiest tier 6 units in the game. We can also see 10 to 19 Yetis, and we can see here 20 to 49 Snow Elves. So the Bulwark town is set in Vori, which is the land of the Snow Elves. This is a legit land that does exist in Heroes of Might and Magic 3, but actually never got depicted within the game. So Jelyu, for example, the hero who upgrades Grand Elves into sharpshooters, you might remember he has very pale skin. That is because he is himself, I can't remember if he's either a snow elf or a half snow elf. But yeah, he's a snow elf from the northern island of Vori. So this is a concept that already exists within the game, and what we're seeing here is the Horn of the Abyss team's take on that concept. Some of you might be familiar with the story of Vori and its contribution to the end of the world that Heroes of Might and Magic 3 is set in, which involves the Armageddon's Blade on the Day of Reckoning. So I did make a previous video about actually a separate mod called Day of Reckoning, which also depicts the Vori Snow Elves in its planned Palace faction. I'm not planning to talk too much about Day of Reckoning in this video because that is a separate mod, but for those of you who are wondering about the concept of Vori, I do explain it a little bit more in that video and how it ties into the kind of wider Heroes of Might and Magic 3 story. But also, just in case some of you are wondering, the Day of Reckoning mod is still very much in development. They are a completely separate mod. I believe they're an English-speaking mod team, whereas the Horn of the Abyss team is a Russian-speaking mod team. Quite similar concept for a mod, but a completely separate mod. Still very much in development, I believe, still progressing. Plans to introduce the Palace faction, which is their take on the Vori Snow Elves, and also plans to introduce a couple more towns along with it, one of which is the Forge town. The Forge town does not exist in Horn of the Abyss. The Factory town actually was the Horn of the Abyss team's take on the kind of Forge concept. They dialed it down a lot. They turned it into something quite different. Day of Reckoning planning to make its own actual Forge town. Anyway, it's a separate project, and as far as I'm aware, I don't know if this needs to be said, but as far as I'm aware, relations between the two mod teams are pretty good. I saw praise from at least one member of the Day of Reckoning team for the Bulwark concept, so we do currently have 2 mods in development that are both kind of doing their own interpretation of the same thing. But I think from the perspective of a fan, it's a good thing to have 2 separate, quite ambitious mods, both trying to capture the same loose idea in their own way. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for now about Day of Reckoning. It is still an ongoing project, it is still in development, but it's going to be completely separate from Horn of the Abyss, even though there will be similarities between the 2. Okay, let's jump back into the trailer. So we see Eichthen, we see the Vori Snow Elves, which are, I believe, a spear-throwing range unit, and we will continue to watch. So it goes to the town, let's go have a quick look. Town of Boria, we can see the icon just there of the town itself. And at this point, they fade into a proper preview. Now, before we go any further, I did get a comment a while back. Somebody asked me if there was possibly an Easter egg in this particular screenshot, because we can actually see right here at the bottom right, we can see a different hero. And this appears to be a completely new hero class. We can see it doesn't look the same from behind as the Chieftain hero class, but we don't know what this is. Somebody did ask me if I thought this was a potential teaser for a 4th Horn of the Abyss town. I think it's way too soon for them to be dropping a teaser for a 4th town. I don't know if they will even make a 4th town, so I don't think that is what that is. I think, if anything, that is probably the magic class hero of the Bulwark town. We've seen the Chieftains, this is possibly the magic counterpart. So here we have a graphic of the town itself. This is purely cinematic, of course. It won't look quite the same, but if I had to guess, I would say this on the right is probably the Mage Guild. Seems to only go up to tier 3, but it's way too soon to speculate on whether that is the case. To the left we see a giant horn, probably inspired by the Horn of the Abyss or closely linked to it. And this, I'm guessing, is the town hall. So zooms out a little bit further. If we go slightly further back, we can see to the left there, that appears to be the fort / citadel / castle. And that is it from a different angle. And now we come on to the battle screen itself. So these are units we've seen previously. All of these visuals are going to be updated. We saw an update from Tevye, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Tevye, the lead of the Horn of the Abyss project, where he has said that even since this video was released in January 2025, the visuals for some of these units have already been updated by March of 2025. So if you're not fully convinced by some of the visuals you see in this video, they are all very much early visuals. Will definitely be updated over time. I think this particular video actually does show a little bit of pixelation around the edges of the units, but I think probably also worth pointing out that if you have a look, we can see the Halfling Grenadiers, the Gunslingers, the Coatls, and the Mechanics also look a bit pixelated, so it's probably just the visual settings of whoever recorded this video. We can see the Chieftain in battle sprite there, we can see the Vori Elves, we can see the Mammoth, the tier 6 unit, we can see the Yetis, the tier 4 unit, and we can see the Jotun, the tier 7 unit. So those move in, they go for an attack. Jotun Warlords, so I'm guessing that is the tier 7 upgraded unit, so the strongest unit in the town. Does 152 damage. Coatls do 60 damage back, so they're obviously much stronger units. Gunslingers fire back. The Snow Elves, I'm guessing these are the unupgraded Vori Elves. They throw a spear. Does a small amount of damage, kills off the Coatl. Halfling Grenadiers then attack the Jotun. Yetis move up, go for the attack on the Mechanics. Again, not yet finished visuals, do bear that in mind, and that is all we see from the battle screen. And it returns to the visuals of the town screen, not really the town screen, but the planned town screen, and that is all we see from the teaser trailer. But we do have a separate preview post that has been posted by Tevye, the project lead, which does go into a lot more detail about what we can expect from this town. So let's have a quick look through that. So the Bulwark was one of the first faction concepts in Horn of the Abyss, along with the Cove. and for them this is a return to their roots. Now this is no exaggeration, there is actually a thread right here on Heroes Community from 2008, the original Horn of the Abyss thread. Got 100 pages, and one of the first things that was posted on it, I again don't know how to pronounce this, Docent Pecolan, the original founder of the project who passed away a few years ago, he actually posted all the way back in 2008 with a number of concepts, both for the Cove Town and for what was then known as the Kronwerk Town. And both of these are obviously concepts that go all the way back to the very first days of Horn of the Abyss. So we can see the original planned lineup here. This was when it was planned to be a lot more like Dwarf and Human and Norse focused. So this unit, this kind of 6th tier unit, has obviously been replaced by the Mammoth. The Jotun you can see was already there as a concept all the way back in 2008, and the rest of these concepts don't appear to have survived. But if we scroll down we can see they were depicted on the battle screen right here. And on this screen we see a goat themed unit. And this actually has made it into the town. This concept does still exist in Bulwark, and I'll come back to this when we go through the preview post. All of these visuals obviously have been are no longer being kept and have continued to be developed. But just to give you a concept of how much these things can change visually, if we actually scroll down this thread from 2008, we get to another preview post, also posted in 2008, and this shows you the early concept of the Cove Town, which I thought was worth sharing just because if you're familiar with the Horn of the Abyss mod, you will have seen just how much these concepts have changed. So on this image we can see the Haspid, we can see the Stormbirds, the Acids, the upgraded Stormbirds, one of these is upgraded, I don't know which, and we can also see the Nymphs and the Oceanids. And all of those units have been massively improved. Actually an upgraded Satyr, which obviously didn't make it into the mod. I wouldn't mind seeing that. But yeah, Nymphs and all of the rest of these units, they clearly look a lot worse than what was in the actual released Cove Town. So I really just mention this just to flag that all of the visuals you're seeing in this video, all of the previews you're seeing are really early concepts, probably more developed than this concept that I'm showing right now, but still. The visuals will change a lot as the town is developed and released. The Factory Town and the Cove Town were both announced multiple years before their release, and in the same vein, we don't know when Bulwark is coming out. I would be very surprised. What tends to happen is the Horn of the Abyss team tends to release big updates at New Year, but I would be very surprised if they go as far as releasing the Bulwark Town as soon as New Year 2026. I'm guessing it will be at least a couple of years. It could be January 2027, but it's complete speculation. We don't know. It's very likely they will release it on New Year's Day, but we don't know which, so it's way too soon to say. So the town is a community of inhabitants of the Vori island belonging to a number of intelligent races: elves, so the snow elves we already mentioned, Jotuns, kobolds, and Yeti. The style of the town, like all others in Heroes of Might and Magic 3, is eclectic. It is based on a mixture of aesthetics of various northern peoples, Scandinavia and the Scottish Highland, as well as indigenous peoples of Siberia and the far north. The main focus of the faction is defense, so probably some similarities to the Fortress Town. The presented visuals of the Bulwark's inhabitants are preliminary, as I've already mentioned. He does mention it here himself. The town will be released with a campaign that will reveal its history. And then there are a couple of other things they mention about their future plans. So they are planning to develop an advanced event system for the scenario editor, and they're also planning to at some point rebalance spells. So we know they've just done a rebalance of skills and specialties. They are also planning to rebalance spells at some point. And I'm sure that on the whole they're going to do a really good job with that, because we all know that some spells are a lot better than others. And right now, as the game currently is, I don't think anyone who says that fire magic is as good as earth magic is a serious person. So there's still something to be addressed there, but we're just going to cover Bulwark in this video. So the inhabitants of Vori Island were covered very scarcely in the original games by NWC, and discussions about what a Vori themed faction might look like in Heroes of Might and Magic 3 haven't stopped since 1999. Tevu says we also keep receiving questions about the fate of the Kronwerk concept, and they intend to finally follow up on all of that. The niche of the town is associated with the archetypal north and is not fully occupied in Heroes of Might and Magic 3, The stronghold only fits that concept to a small extent, while the tower, despite being snow as its native terrain, does not reflect that concept at all. So the post goes on to mention that the original concept of the town was developed all the way back in fact 2007, and the idea was at some point that this was going to be a dwarf-based town, which I think is what we see back on this other thread. But we can see this was the original plan for the lineup, so it was a lot more humanoid, a lot more dwarf-focused, but still had the kind of goat-themed units, which we will see shortly. In response to the question of how does the new faction fit into the gameplay, what niche will it occupy, the response is, the main focus of the new faction is defense. Its creatures generally have a high defense skill and a significant HP value, but average speed, which sets them apart from those of Fortress. I think what they're trying to say there is that the Bulwark creatures are going to be on average slightly faster than Fortress, because I would perceive Fortress as a slower town. So I think that's what they're saying. The Bulwark will not have any flyers, but there will be 2 intriguing shooters and 2 spellcasters, which should compensate for its shortcomings. Again, can only speculate at this point. I do wonder if the Jotun perhaps have the ability to cast Earthquake. Complete speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is something like that. Screenshot here doesn't really give us too much new information. There are clearly Jotun to the south. We can see upgraded kobolds guarding a warehouse of wood, and we can also see a hero named Duin. So the tier 1 units seen on the adventure map are kobolds. They play the role of defensive-minded infantry, something like the spearmen of the castle or the dwarves of the rampart. These creatures are associated with northern European mythology, and their images are often found in fantasy, so they are familiar to fans of the genre. In addition, they have already been featured in early games of the Might and Magic RPG series. So that is something that Horn of the Abyss team tends to do. A lot of their creature concepts, like sea serpents for example, coatls, these are all creatures that have appeared in the Might and Magic RPG series, and they should therefore fit into the Heroes of Might and Magic 3 concept. The Argali are the tier 2 units of the town. They are quite fast, so at the game's start most likely they will be the army's backbone, while their good damage should allow one to make a shock stack out of them. The factory's armadillos are not only fighters but also a source of food. In the Bulwark, Argali play a similar role for the inhabitants of Vori's austere lands. So in case it's not obvious, the Argali are these kind of goat creatures, the concept that exists all the way back in 2008. They probably won't have any special abilities. They're probably going to be somewhat similar as a concept to the armadillos from the factory town, but they're likely to be significantly faster, but also almost certainly not the same level of tankiness. The tier 3 units are Snow Elves, and it says Vori's Snow Elves are pretty tough for their tier 3. They use javelins in ranged and melee combat, and equally effectively at that. So obviously they are ranged units that have no melee penalty. And yeah, as it says here, Jelyu, the Forest Guard captain from Heroes of Might and Magic 3, was half Vori elf by blood. Next up, Yeti, the tier 4 shock infantry. These creatures were present in several iterations of the lineup. Like kobolds, they make for popular mythological and fantasy images, no less familiar to fans of Might and Magic. And then similar thing here, they have Yetis, examples of Yetis from Might and Magic 1, examples of Yetis from Might and Magic 9, and Yeti of Ardon from Crusaders of Might and Magic for the PS1. The tier 5 units are Shamans. So Shamans were our choice as tier 5 units. These are shooters and spellcasters providing magic and range support to the troops. They are the keepers of lore and tradition, as well as the spiritual leaders of the Snow Elves. So the Snow Elves, I believe, then do occupy both the tier 3 and tier 5 slots of the town. We can see in this image there are 17 Shamans, preparing to go up against some Jotun warlords, Mammoths, and Yetis. Mammoths are tier 6, they will be the tankiest unit on this tier. Their image embodies both the broad northern aesthetic and the defense-focused nature of the faction. And then it says the tier 7 unit is the Jotun. These are meaty infantry with good damage dealing ability, and at the same time they are one of the town's spellcasters. And then yeah, similarly, backing up their concept, Frost Giants appeared in Might and Magic 9 and Crusaders of Might and Magic, and they have a couple of screenshots of those. The choice of units for the announcement was determined by the fact that they best reflect the faction's spirit. In our concept, Snow Elves, Javelin Throwers and Shamans Kobolds, Yeti, and Jotuns are the main races inhabiting Vori, and they will also become the faction's heroes. Argali and Mammoths, on their part, are cogs of the Bulwark's ecosystem and everyday life. And again, just to reiterate, as the mod leader himself says, all of these visuals are preliminary. There is still much work ahead on tuning animations, post-processing sprites, correcting lighting, camera angles, etc. And they're happy to hear the community's opinion, and they're happy to receive feedback. Next, he responds to the question of which heroes will lead the armies of Bulwark. The Might heroes are called Chieftains, and the Magic ones are Elders. So perhaps that overworld sprite we saw earlier was the Elder. Their parameters and abilities will emphasize the faction's strengths as well as offset some of its weaknesses. For now, we can say that the Chieftains will be big on defensive tactics, while the Elders will focus on acquiring new knowledge. I mean, that's pretty obviously hinting that they will gain a lot of knowledge as they level up. The Bulwark's heroes are inclined to use the forces of water and air, since the lands of Vori are known to be inhabited by skilled cryomancers. So do note the lack of mention of earth magic there. I do wonder if the intention is to rebalance water magic to make it slightly better. Typically earth magic is considered the outright best school of magic, followed by air magic, followed by water, followed by fire. Not everyone's going to agree with that, but it's likely that we will see some spells adjusted to hopefully make them a little bit more even. Next, on the Bulwark's buildings, in addition to buildings that increase the growth of certain creatures, a structure is planned that improves the exchange rate in the market. There will be a couple more, but we would like to leave their purpose as a surprise for players. And then here we have the Bulwark Castle model in slightly bigger form. But yeah, improved exchange rate at the market, it's an interesting concept. It kind of serves the same purpose as the Thieves Guild for the Cove, which does improve the tavern's intel gathering function, I suppose. I imagine in the same way this will effectively give you a second market in the same town in terms of its influence on exchange rates. Each town does have at least one of its own unique buildings, and yeah, that's a new concept that hasn't yet been put in the game that does feel like it would fit in quite well. The musical theme is being composed by Migret, who contributed greatly to creating a final version of the factory theme. On the new faction's philosophy and alignment, it says Vori elves are isolationists. They rarely venture out of their native island, although other islanders may be more aggressive. For example, ice giants are known for raiding Jadame. However, should one trespass into their territory, they will defend it with all their might, sometimes even if the aliens, and I think by that it means invaders, have no intent to fight. They are adept at wearing the enemy down with defensive tactics and magic that strengthens their own and weakens the enemy. How will the new faction feature into the overall plot? It says the history of the faction has a lot to do with the glaciation of the Vori island. Those who stayed there were forced to adapt to the harsh conditions. They allied themselves with the mountain dwellers and tamed the local rare animals. All of that helped the Vori elves survive, but the terrible climate wasn't their only problem. Will the campaign's events be related to the Sword of Frost? So the Sword of Frost clashing with the Armageddon's Blade, both of these things from the story. I talked a little bit more about this again in my Day of Reckoning video, which has the similar concept about the Sword of Frost. But yeah, the Sword of Frost clashed with the Armageddon's Blade, and that is what destroyed the world of Heroes of Might and Magic 3, in case you're not aware of that. Will the Bulwark's campaign feature characters from other Heroes of Might and Magic 3 campaigns? Yes, after all, the backstory of the Sword of Frost is intertwined with the stories of Jelyu and Kilgore, characters known from the campaigns of the Shadow of Death and Armageddon's Blade expansions, as well as from Heroes Chronicles. If you don't know Heroes Chronicles, it is a separate, standalone campaign pack for Heroes of Might and Magic 3. And if you would like to pick up Heroes Chronicles, I will leave a link in the description to where you can buy it. But yeah, Kilgore also appears in Darjim's campaign, released in the most recent version of Hall of the Abyss, so that is already out. And then the rest of the post is just about the release of the All-In campaign, which was released at the start of 2025. So that's already in the game, and that is pretty much all we know so far about Bulwark. They will drip feed us some more information at some point, but for most of 2025, I think this is going to be all the information we have. So I hope that's been helpful. If you're new to the channel, do feel free to subscribe for more Heroes content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.